Hi guys, this is my second tutorial on Chart.js. Today I'm going to talk about data structures. So as you can see here, I'm in the Chart.js website and I have their example from the usage section in my VS Code, and I'm gonna use that example to talk about the data structures. So as you can see right here, I have that example here. I will drag this to my left, and I have already installed the extension lab server, and I'm now serving my website on my local host. So I'm gonna drag that one right here. Okay, so as you can see right now, this is the most basic use case of Chart.js, where you have all your labels in one like string array, and you have all of your data in another array. And one thing that you should pay attention to is when you are making a bar chart, the data should all be numbers. You can't have strings in here. So each element from this array in a specific index is pointing to the data in this array at the same index. So the red should be 12, the blue should be 19, and so on and so forth. As is introduced in their website, there are several other formats of the data that you can use. So let me comment this out. So when you are using the other variants, which are actually objects, or you can say key value pairs, you don't have to specify your labels, because the keys are gonna be your your labels, and the values are actually the data you want to render on this chart. So the first example from their website is this one, which is a little bit confusing because it is a use case of scatter chart instead of a bar chart. So let me make the change of the type of the chart from here. So now you can see the scatters over here. It's very simple and clear that you have each one of your points on your chart as a object, which you have two properties, the x property and y property, each specify a position on your chart. So you have where your points are by saying the x is 10 and the y is 20, which is exactly what it shows right here. So let me comment this out. So the second variant, this is actually how I name it, is you can say the x should, which in this case is the label in the last case, I mean the first case, and the y, which is your data in the first case. So this is how you use this example right here. So you can see the problem now is nothing showed up from here. That is because that we are still using scatter chart. In the case of scatter chart, you need to have all your x and y have a value of numbers. You can't have a string in either of these two objects. I mean properties. Okay, so let me change this into bar. So now you can see something from here. So the x here is the label right here, and the y is the value of that label. Let me comment this out. Then they give us the third variant of how we can use the data. In this case, you can see the label here is not called X or Y, which are the default names of the label and data. Instead, it is called ID right here. So the ID now should be the label, but Chart.js has no idea what is the name you want or what is the name of your labels. And also, you can see the value right here is not Y, it's now nested into another object. So what we need to do is to tell Chart.js how it should parse the data, like how the data should be rendered and selected. So from here you have an options property. You can specify how you're gonna parse the data by saying parsing. Then you can say the x-axis should be ID, which is right here, and the y-axis the x-axis and the y-axis, the y-axis should be nested value, which is this property. Then you can see the value are properly rendered on your chart. And let me comment this out. The very last variant, which you can see is here. Oh, sorry. So you don't have to specify the y and the x property. All you need to do is you make the label as the key of your key value pair and the data as the value. So right here you can see January has a value of 10 and February has a value of 20. This is very clear. Okay, now you can see at the end of their documentation of this section, there's like a one last example right here. It says parsing. So let me show you how this works. I have copied everything from their documentation into a new HTML file. But one thing different is that I specify the colors from here. Okay, so in this case, they have their data right here, which is an array with 2 objects. And the first object says the property X is January, and they have 3 values, and the second object has X value of February with 3 data. Okay, and here you can say the labels are January and February. If you recall the very first example here, as we talked about that each element in the array of labels should be pointing to one element in the data array, which is at the same index. So here, since there are 2 labels, so obviously there should be 2 different data pointing to those 2 labels. And in this case, the data are not a data of one single value. It's like a set of values pointing to one label. Okay, so you can see the first object in the data sets says label of this and data of data, but here it also specifies how they want to parse the data. So you can understand this by, this is not how they parse the data, this is how they tell, like you tell Chart.js what data you should use. So in this case, we tell Chart.js that under this very first label, you should use the data from here. Okay, and also we can specify the colors. These are what I just copied from our very first example. So let me show you how it looks right now. So now it should be parsing. Okay, this is very weird because the colors in this example is not set properly. Okay, so let me just comment out the second and the third data from here so you can understand what we are doing right now. Okay, so this is very clear that you have two labels. For each label you have a data here. Okay, and the data here is pointing to the net. So you can see in our first case, in the data sets, the data right here is an array, and this one is pointing to here, and this one is pointing to the index 1, which is actually the second element in this array. So here it should work the same way, which means the January should pointing to the first element in the data, and the February should pointing to the second element in the data. Since we specify how we want Chart.js to use the data, which means what data exactly should be rendering, should be putting in the chart by saying this. So now the data should be something like this. So here, okay, even though what you see is everything from here, but under the hood the data is not parsed into this format. So now you can understand why the chart is like this. Okay, so the second thing we do is, since under each label there should be several bars like in that category, we need a second data set right here. So now we can come now everything from here. Okay, so this one is like working the same way as here. Since you have two labels, you're telling Chart.js, under this label I want to render this dataset. After that, Chart.js just go through your code and suddenly it sees that, oh, there's a second dataset, so I should render it. So how I should show the second dataset? It should be working the same way as the first one, which is one label is pointing to one data, one label is pointing to one data. So the only difference here is that we specify a different way to parse the data, kind of like we tell Chart.js, in this dataset you're not gonna use this array as your data, you're gonna use this array as your data, which is 50, which is 55. So you can see here is 50 and 55. So why the colors are still the same? That is because that when we say the background color, the border color, we are telling Chart.js in this dataset, which is in the first object, you should use these colors, which means the first data should use this color and the second one should use this color. Okay, so in our case, since I just simply copied everything, Chart.js goes to the second object and did the same thing as it did in our first object. So the color should be selected from the very first one, which is this one. So they are in the same color. So you can imagine if I comment out this color, so the cost of goods sold in January should be in blue. Okay, so this is like everything is used by Chart.js in order. So all you need to do is to give it a red order. Okay, now I'm gonna give it a third object, as you can see here. Okay, everything just showed up. Okay, so this is all from the data structure section on their website, and thank you so much.